There's a unique kind of unease that creeps in when you're alone on a dark mountain road. The silence presses against you, the kind that feels alive, heavy with secrets. That night, as I hauled my trailer through winding roads, I couldn't shake the sensation that something wasn't right. The headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead, leaving the rest of the world cloaked in shadow. True scary stories often start in moments like these, where isolation turns into something far more sinister. At a gas station midway through my trip, I stepped out to check the trailer, my flashlight cutting through the foggy night. That's when I saw them, faint handprints smeared across the side, their shapes distorted like they'd been dragged. My breath hitched, but what caught my attention even more were the footprints, bare, small, and trailing toward the back. The air seemed colder near the trailer, my breath visible in the dim beam of light. Creepy true stories often start with something simple, something your mind tries to rationalize, but your gut refuses to ignore. Shrugging off the unease, I climbed back into the cab and hit the road, but the memory of those prints lingered. The deeper I drove into the mountains, the more oppressive the darkness became. Then, in the mirror, I saw it, a pale, ghostly figure darting out of view. My heart raced as I glanced back, the hair on my arms standing on end. Nothing. Haunted places aren't always landmarks. Sometimes they're stretches of road that feel like they're watching you, waiting. The glimpses of movement in the mirrors became more frequent. Each time, the pale figure grew clearer, closer. At one point, it felt as though it was climbing the side of the trailer, its shadow moving unnaturally fast. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my knuckles white. Then came the sound, a soft tapping. On the back of the cab, rhythmic and deliberate. My chest tightened as the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Bone-chilling true stories don't just scare you, they make you feel utterly vulnerable. I pulled over at the next rest stop, my heart hammering as I stepped out with my flashlight. The air was eerily still, the usual hum of insects and rustling leaves absent. As I approached the back of the trailer, the tapping stopped, replaced by a low whisper. The sound didn't make sense. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, my flashlight flickered, the beam struggling against the darkness. Real-life horror isn't just what you see, it's what you feel in the pit of your stomach when logic fails you. The handprints were back, this time fresh and more defined, as if they'd just been pressed into the metal. My breath hitched as I reached out to touch them, only to feel the metal ice cold, almost burning my fingertips. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it again, a face pale and hollow, reflected in the side of the trailer. I spun around, but there was nothing there. True ghost stories linger in the spaces where reality begins to fray. I didn't stop again until I reached the first signs of a small town. The streetlights felt like a lifeline as I pulled into a parking lot, jumping out of the cab with shaky hands. As I circled the trailer, the handprints were gone, the metal smooth and untouched. It was as if the night had swallowed the evidence, leaving nothing but the pounding in my chest. Terrifying true events don't always leave proof, but they leave questions that never go away. A local trucker saw me and walked over, his face pale when I described what had happened. "You're not the first," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That stretch of road, it's got a reputation." He told me about other drivers who'd seen similar things, figures in the mirrors, sounds that didn't belong. Creepy true stories shared in hushed tones, warnings passed down from one traveler to the next. I didn't sleep that night, every shadow outside the motel window making my skin crawl. The next morning, I inspected the trailer again, but there was nothing. No prints, no evidence of what had happened. It was as if the night itself had erased everything, leaving only the memory burned into my mind. True encounters with the unexplained don't give you answers. They leave you questioning everything. Even now, I avoid that stretch of highway. The memory of the handprints, the pale face, and the whispers lingers like a shadow over my thoughts. But the road is full of dangers, some more human than supernatural. The next story I heard came from a friend, a tale about a false roadblock and the terror of realizing not all threats are in the dark. Sometimes they wear a smile and wave. "You down?" Driving alone at night can lull you into a false sense of security. The hum of the engine, the empty stretch of road, and the rhythmic passing of mile markers. It all feels predictable, almost comforting. That night, the highway was a shadowy tunnel, my headlights barely piercing the darkness. Then I saw them, flashing hazard lights far ahead, breaking the monotony like a warning I didn't yet understand. True scary stories often start with something mundane, something that makes you question if you should stop or keep going. As I approached, the details came into view. A pickup truck with its hood propped open, a sedan parked a few feet behind it, and a man waving his arms frantically. The scene felt staged, too deliberate, like a bad play meant to convince an unsuspecting driver to step into the spotlight. His movements were exaggerated, his face partially obscured by the harsh beam of my headlights. Haunted places aren't always dark and decrepit. Sometimes they're lit by flashing lights and desperation. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. My foot hovered over the brake as my eyes scanned the scene. That's when I saw him, a second man lurking in the shadows behind the truck, his posture tense, like a predator waiting to pounce. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't just a breakdown. This was something darker. Real-life horror doesn't give you clear answers. It presents choices that feel equally dangerous. The man in the open waved me down, stepping closer to the road. His eyes met mine through the windshield, and for a moment, his expression shifted from desperation to something far more menacing. I hit the horn, the sound shattering the silence, and his face twisted into anger. That's when the second man stepped into view, holding what looked like a crowbar. My chest tightened as adrenaline kicked in. Creepy true stories aren't about what happens. They're about the split seconds when you decide to fight or flee. Without thinking, I floored the gas. The truck roared forward, the trailer rocking as it gained speed. The men jumped back, but not before the crowbar scraped loudly against the side of the cab. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, like nails on a chalkboard. In the mirror, I saw them running to their vehicles, their shouts drowned out by the roar of my engine. Terrifying true events remind you how fragile safety is, how quickly it can shatter. The road stretched before me, endless and shrouded in darkness. My headlights barely cut through the oppressive black, casting fleeting glimpses of trees swaying in the wind. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the sound of distant wildlife. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a flicker of orange light far ahead. A bonfire, I thought at first, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just one. True scary stories begin in moments like this, where curiosity wars with dread, and you can't help but move forward. The fires came into view, perfectly spaced along the roadside, their flames eerily steady despite the breeze. Around each fire stood figures, tall, thin, and completely still. Their silhouettes were barely illuminated by the flickering light, but the absence of movement was unsettling. My hands tightened on the wheel as I slowed the truck, my instincts screaming at me to keep going. Haunted places don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they appear quietly, waiting for you to notice their wrongness. As I approached the first bonfire, my headlights swept across the figures. They didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't move at all. It was as if they were carved from stone. But then, as my truck crawled past, I thought I saw one of their heads turn slightly, just enough to follow my movement. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed the gas instinctively, putting distance between me and the flames. Real-life horror doesn't always scream. It lingers in the quiet moments, daring you to notice. The second fire loomed closer, its glow casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. This time, I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the figures. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a sudden movement, quick and unnatural. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel tighter. I forced myself to glance in the mirror, and there it was, one of the figures, now standing in the middle of the road behind me. Creepy true stories don't just unsettle you, they make you question what's real. The fires continued, one after another, lining the road like a path to somewhere I didn't want to go. The figures seemed to multiply, each more unsettling than the last. Their outlines flickered with the flames, almost as if they weren't fully solid. Then came the sound, a low hum, almost like chanting, though I couldn't make out the words. It vibrated in my chest, filling the cab with an oppressive weight. Bone-chilling true stories don't just scare you, they press down on you, leaving you breathless. By the time I reached the fifth fire, my fear turned to panic. The chanting grew louder, and I swore I saw the figures stepping closer to the road. My only thought was escape. I slammed on the gas, the truck lurching forward as the fires blurred into streaks of orange in my peripheral vision. But even as I sped away, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. True encounters with the paranormal stay with you, clinging to your thoughts long after the danger has passed. Finally, the fires disappeared behind me, swallowed by the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Up ahead, I saw it again. Another fire, alone this time, its flames flickering weakly. As I drew closer, I realized this one was different. There were no figures, no chanting, just the fire. But something about it felt even more wrong, like it was waiting for me. Haunted places don't need to be crowded to be terrifying. Sometimes their emptiness is enough. I veered off the road, taking a narrow dirt path that cut through the trees. The truck bounced and jolted as I maneuvered through the uneven terrain, the sound of breaking branches echoing around me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I glanced in the mirrors, half expecting to see the figures following. But there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the distant glow of the fire I'd left behind. Terrifying true events remind you that some escapes are temporary. When I finally reached the main highway, the fires were gone, but their presence lingered. Every shadow along the roadside made me flinch. Every flicker of light sent my heart racing. At a truck stop hours later, I told the story to another driver. His face paled as I described the chanting. The figures. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "That stretch of road, no one knows who or what they are, but they've been there for decades." Chilling real-life stories aren't about answers. They're about the questions that haunt you forever. Even now, I can't see a bonfire without feeling a chill. The memory of those silent figures burned into my mind. But the road has many dangers, and not all of them are supernatural. Some wear uniforms, carry badges, and hide their darkness behind authority. And what happened next? Well, let's just say it proved that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who pretend to protect you. The highway stretched endlessly before me, its silence broken only by the hum of my engine. It was one of those nights where the darkness seemed thicker, heavier, as if the world beyond my headlights didn't exist. Then, out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights pierced the blackness ahead. Relief washed over me at first. It had been hours since I'd seen another vehicle, but as I got closer, a gnawing unease settled in. True, scary stories often start with something familiar, something that feels safe, until it's not. The lights illuminated a makeshift checkpoint, a beat-up police cruiser, two men standing beside it, and a flashlight flickering erratically. Their uniforms were crumpled, their badges barely visible in the dim glow. As I slowed the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was no backup vehicle, no cones marking the area, just the two men and their unconvincing setup. Haunted places aren't always landmarks. Sometimes they're the spaces where trust starts to crack. I rolled the truck to a stop, my hands gripping the wheel as one of the men approached. He motioned for me to lower the window, his face partially hidden by the beam of his flashlight. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice sharp but not official. I cracked the window just enough to hand over my papers, my gut screaming at me that something wasn't right. Real-life horror isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments where the danger feels too close. The second man lingered near the back of the truck, his shadow moving unnaturally in my mirrors. My breath caught as I realized he was holding something long, maybe a weapon, maybe worse. The first man leaned closer to the window, his smile thin and unsettling. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. his tone leaving no room for argument. My chest tightened as adrenaline surged. Creepy true stories often hinge on decisions you're forced to make, and this was one of them. I hesitated, scanning the area for an escape route. The road was too narrow to turn, and the truck too large to maneuver quickly. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. The man's smile faded, replaced by an expression that sent a chill down my spine. "Routine inspection," he said, his hand resting on what looked like a holster. "Bone-chilling true stories don't just scare you, they make you feel trapped, like the walls are closing in." A few miles down the road, I spotted something that made my stomach drop, a makeshift barricade. Tree branches, logs, and debris were strewn across the road, forcing me to slow down. My pulse pounded as I realized this wasn't random. They had planned for drivers like me, ones who didn't stop. The only way around was the dirt shoulder, narrow and uneven. Bone-chilling true stories don't give you easy escapes. They force you to take risks you'd never consider. I navigated the truck around the barricade, the trailer swaying dangerously as the tires crunched over the uneven ground. Every second felt like an eternity, the fear of getting stuck gnawing at the edges of my mind. Finally, I made it back onto the asphalt, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the barricade grew smaller, but the fear clung to me, heavy and suffocating. True encounters with the unexplained aren't always supernatural. Sometimes they're painfully human. When I reached a gas station, I pulled in and locked the doors, my heart still racing. The fluorescent lights felt like a shield against the darkness outside. I called the police, explaining what had happened. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of urgency. "We've had reports like this before," she said. "You're lucky you didn't stop." Her words confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just an isolated incident. Unsolved mysteries don't always involve ghosts. Sometimes they're about the predators who haunt the highways. The police arrived quickly, inspecting the truck and taking my statement. The dent from the crowbar was evidence enough of what could have happened. "You did the right thing," one officer said, his tone grave. "People who stop, well, let's just say it doesn't end well for them." His words left a chill that no amount of bright lights or friendly faces could erase. Real-life horror experiences don't just scare you, they stay with you, a constant reminder of how close danger can come. Even now, I can't drive at night without replaying that moment. The flashing lights, the barricade, the men's faces. Twisted with anger, the road is full of traps, some more obvious than others. And what came next? Well, let's just say it proved that even the firelight of a distant camp isn't always a sign of safety. Sometimes it's a warning of what's waiting in the shadows. Just as I prepared to act, another set of lights appeared in the distance. Brighter, more official. A real police cruiser pulled up behind the makeshift checkpoint, its sirens cutting through the oppressive silence. The two men froze, their facade cracking as the real officers stepped out. Without a word, they bolted, their old cruiser kicking up dust as they sped away. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but the fear lingered. Terrifying true events don't always end when the danger leaves. Sometimes they stay with you, echoing in your mind. The real officers approached, their movements calm but purposeful. "Are you all right?" one of them asked, his voice steady but concerned. I nodded, though my hands still shook on the wheel. They inspected the scene, noting the crude setup and the dent on my trailer where one of the men had struck it. "You're lucky you didn't get out," one officer said, his tone serious. "These guys don't usually leave witnesses." Real-life horror experiences often come with a chilling reminder of how close you came to disaster. They explained that similar incidents had been reported along this stretch of highway, fake checkpoints used to rob, or worse, unsuspecting drivers. "You did the right thing," one officer assured me, but his words did little to ease the knot in my stomach. The idea that these men were still out there, setting traps for others, made my skin crawl. Unsolved mysteries aren't always about the unknown. Sometimes they're about the predators hiding in plain sight. Even after the officers left, I couldn't shake the fear. Every pair of headlights behind me felt like a threat. Every shadow on the roadside, a potential ambush. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit truck stop hours later, where the fluorescent lights felt like a barrier between me and the darkness. But even there, the memory of those men, their unsettling smiles and fake authority haunted me. True encounters with danger don't just end, they change the way you see the world. Since that night, I've learned to question everything, to trust my instincts even when logic says otherwise. But the scariest part, knowing those men are still out there, waiting for their next victim. And if you think this was terrifying, just wait until you hear the stories other truckers have shared, because sometimes the road's dangers aren't supernatural. They're the ones that look human, but carry darkness far deeper than anything you've ever imagined.